Somewhat towards the beginning of the book, The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, there's a chapter called The Grand Inquisitor, and it's one of the most famous chapters in all of literature. The book, The Brothers Karamazov, tells the story of the Karamazov family and the 4 children of Fyodor Karamazov. And eventually, it tells the story of the fallout from the murder of the father of Fyodor Karamazov. Each of the 4 Karamazov children are very different from each other, and the Grand Inquisitor chapter takes place shortly after the brothers have been reunited, and it tells of a conversation between 2 of the brothers, Ivan and Alyosha. Alyosha is a deeply spiritual and religious person. He's dedicating his life to living as a monastic, secluded in a monastery, in the service of an elder, a religious spiritual leader. Whereas Ivan, on the other hand, is a very cerebral person. He's a very intellectual person. He's an academic person. He publishes philosophical articles. And he may or may not be an atheist. That's one of the questions. Some people read his writing and say this guy is definitely an atheist, and some people read it and they think he's not. So that's sort of an ambiguity. And they're both in their 20s. And in this chapter, Ivan is with Alyosha, and he wants to tell him a story that he wrote. He wrote this little book called The Grand Inquisitor. And the significance of the story, the significance of this chapter, it's this shocking indictment of the Christian church. And it's just a brilliantly crafted attack, basically, on organized religion. This is a fascinating chapter for the way it deals with the question of organized religion. It deals with the question of what role does religion play in human psychology? What is religion like in the modern world? And it deals very deeply with the question of what does it mean to be free? What is freedom? Do people want freedom, or do they want to be submissive servants to others, to their people that they see as their religious leaders? And the chapter and the story that Ivan tells is just unbelievably shocking and offensive and subversive. And it's just incredibly explosive piece of writing. In his own life, Dostoevsky responded to criticisms about this chapter. He was challenged. How could he have possibly written something like this and published it, because it's just so inflammatory? And his response was, it's true that this is a very offensive chapter, but the rest of the book, The Brothers Karamazov, is actually a response to that chapter. Which, for me, the way I interpret that is to say just that the book contains multitudes. It contains many voices. And although Ivan is a very eloquent, thoughtful character, the book contains other characters and other perspectives. And I think that's correct. I think, taken as a whole, the book is a very deep and complex and very layered book with many different ideas. So before jumping into the text itself, I'm just going to sort of summarize in very broad strokes what happens in this chapter. So Ivan wants to share the story with Alyosha that he wrote, and he sets this story in around 16th century Spain, where there's Inquisition going on, and the Grand Inquisitor is searching out heretics and burning them at the stake. And in this context, Jesus appears, and he starts to walk around the town. And the people of the town immediately recognize him and are amazed to see him. And they're crying, and Jesus is performing miracles again and healing sick people. And the archbishop sees this and sees that Jesus has come back, and he has Jesus arrested. And obviously, in the context of the story that Ivan's telling, the Grand Inquisitor is sort of the representative, the embodiment of the modern Christian church, modern in the sense of Ivan's time, the way Ivan sees the role of the Christian church in society and the role of the clergy. And so the Grand Inquisitor arrests Jesus and puts him in a terrible prison cell, and he visits him there, and he sits down with Jesus in the prison cell, and he gives him a very long speech about how we no longer have any use for you. The people have no need for you because you tried to offer them freedom and redemption, and the people don't want to be free. The people can't handle freedom. Freedom doesn't work for the masses. The people are followers. The people need their leaders to give them their food and give them their guidance. He's basically arguing that the people are too weak-minded for the message that Jesus brought. And he does this through the prism of a really fascinating and brilliant textual interpretation of the three temptations of Christ, which is a story from the Gospels that talks about how Jesus was tempted by the devil with three different temptations. And at the end of this interaction, the Grand Inquisitor says, "Tomorrow we're going to have you burned at the stake." The story of the temptations of Christ as it appears in the Gospels tells of Jesus shortly after being baptized by John the Baptist, fasting in the desert, and after 40 days being approached by Satan, who tries to tempt him. And Satan offers him three temptations. The first is some bread, because Jesus hasn't eaten anything in 40 days. He tempts Jesus to turn a stone into bread for himself to eat. The second temptation is he tells Jesus to throw himself from the pinnacle of a temple so that God's angels might catch him at the last minute before he dies. And the third temptation is kingdoms and wealth, the wealth of the earth and the kingdoms of the earth. And so it's easy to see why this story of the church burning Jesus at the stake, saying they have no use for him anymore, his message is not relevant to the people, is such a incendiary chapter and such a shocking chapter in literature, especially at the time in which Dostoevsky was writing this. So I actually want to read this a bit inside. It's a very long chapter, and I'm going to read a much abridged version, which is certain sections that I think are important. In his infinite mercy, he walked once again amongst men, in the same human image in which he had walked for 3 years among men 15 centuries earlier. He came down to the scorched squares of a southern town, where just the day before, in a splendid auto de fe, in the presence of the king, the court, knights, cardinals, and the loveliest court ladies, before the teeming populace of all Seville, the Cardinal Grand Inquisitor had burned almost 100 heretics at once. He appeared quietly, inconspicuously, but strange to say, everyone recognized him. People are drawn to him by an invisible force. They flock to him, surround him, follow him. He passes silently among them with a quiet smile of infinite compassion. The sun of love shines in his heart. Rays of light, enlightenment, and power stream from his eyes, and pouring over the people, shake their hearts with responding love. He stretches forth his hands to them, blesses them, and from the touch of him, even only of his garments, comes a healing power. Here an old man, blind from childhood, calls out from the crowd, "Lord, heal me so that I too can see you." And it is as if the scales fell from his eyes, and the blind man sees him. People weep and kiss the earth he walks upon. Children throw down flowers before him, sing and cry Hosanna to him. It is he, it's really he, everyone repeats. It must be he. It can be no one but he. Skipping quite a bit here. There is a commotion among the people, cries, weeping, and at this very moment the Cardinal Grand Inquisitor himself crosses the square in front of the cathedral. He is an old man, almost 90, tall and straight, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes, from which a glitter still shines like a fiery spark. He is followed at a certain distance by his grim assistants and slaves, and by the Holy Guard. At the sight of the crowd, he stops and watches from afar. He has seen everything. He scowls with his thick gray eyebrows, and his eyes shine with a sinister fire. He stretches forth his finger and orders the guard to take him. And such is his power, so tamed, submissive, and tremblingly obedient to his will are the people, that the crowd immediately parts before the guard, and they, amidst the deathly silence that has suddenly fallen, lay their hands on him and lead him away. At this point in the story, Jesus is sitting in his prison cell, and the Grand Inquisitor has come to visit him in the prison cell, and talks about the 3 temptations of Christ. So the Grand Inquisitor says to Jesus, "Decide yourself who was right, you or the one who questioned you then," namely, the devil who tempted Jesus. He continues, "Recall the first question. Its meaning, though not literally, was this: you want to go into the world, and you are going empty-handed, with some promise of freedom, which they, in their simplicity and innate lawlessness, cannot even comprehend, which they dread and fear, for nothing has ever been more insufferable for man and for human society than freedom. But do you see these stones in this bare scorching desert? Turn them into bread, and mankind will run after you like sheep, grateful and obedient, though eternally trembling lest you withdraw your hand, and your loaves cease for them. But you did not want to deprive man of freedom, and rejected the offer. For what sort of freedom it is, you reasoned, if obedience is bought with loaves of bread? You objected that man does not live by bread alone. But do you know that in the name of this very earthly bread, the spirit of the earth will rise against you, and fight with you, and defeat you, and everyone will follow him exclaiming, 'Who can compare to this beast? For he has given us fire from heaven.' Do you know that centuries will pass, and mankind will proclaim with the mouth of its wisdom and science that there is no crime, and therefore no sin, but only hungry men? Feed them first, then ask virtue of them. That is what they will write on the banner they raise against you, and by which your temple will be destroyed." Skipping a bit. "You promised them heavenly bread. But I repeat again, can it compare with earthly bread in the eyes of the weak, eternally depraved, and eternally ignoble human race? And if in the name of heavenly bread, thousands and tens of thousands will follow you, what will become of the millions and tens of thousands of millions of creatures who will not be strong enough to forgo earthly bread for the sake of the heavenly? Is it that only the tens of thousands of the great and strong are dear to you, and the remaining millions, numerous as the sands of the sea, weak, but loving you, should serve only as material for the great and the strong? No, the weak too are dear to us. They are depraved and rebels, but in the end it is they who will become obedient. They will marvel at us and look upon us as gods, because we, standing at their head, have agreed to suffer freedom and to rule over them." Ivan goes on to do a similarly in-depth and rigorous analysis of the other 2 temptations. At the very end of this encounter, the Grand Inquisitor says, "Judge us if you can dare. know that I am not afraid of you. Know that I too was in the wilderness, and I too ate locusts and roots, that I too blessed freedom, with which you have blessed mankind, and I too was preparing to enter the number of your chosen ones, the number of the strong and mighty, with a thirst that the number be complete. But I awoke and did not want to serve madness. I returned and joined the host of those who have corrected your deed. I left the proud and returned to the humble, for the happiness of the humble. What I'm telling you will come true, and our kingdom will be established. Tomorrow, I repeat, you will see this obedient flock, which at my gesture will rush to heap hot coals around your stake, at which I shall burn you for having come to interfere with us. For if anyone has ever deserved our stake, it is you. Tomorrow I shall burn you. Alyosha is horrified by the story that Ivan tells him. Dostoevsky writes, Alyosha, who all the while had listened to him silently, though towards the end in great agitation. He had started many times to interrupt his brother's speech, but obviously restrained himself, suddenly spoke as if tearing himself loose. But that's absurd, he cried, blushing. Your poem praises Jesus. It doesn't revile him as you meant it to. And who will believe you about freedom? Is that any way to understand it? And Alyosha goes on and on with this long response saying why he doesn't think Ivan's ideas are correct. Eventually, Alyosha asks Ivan, what's the ending of the story, or was that the end? Ivan responds, I was going to end it like this. When the Inquisitor fell silent, he waited some time for his prisoner to reply. His silence weighed on him. He had seen how the captive listened to him all the while, intently and calmly, looking him straight in the eye, and apparently not wishing to contradict anything. The old man would have liked him to say something, even something bitter, terrible. But suddenly, he approaches the old man in silence. Jesus approaches the Grand Inquisitor, and gently kisses him on his bloodless 90-year-old lips. Alyosha and Ivan continue to debate, and they get into a fight about something Ivan had said previously in a previous scene where he said everything is permitted. And this offended Alyosha deeply. And Alyosha asks him to renounce that sentiment, and Ivan refuses. Dostoevsky writes, Ivan suddenly spoke with unexpected feeling. Now I see that in your heart too there is no room for me, my dear hermit. The formula, everything is permitted, I will not renounce. And what then? Will you renounce me for that? Will you? Alyosha stood up, went over to him in silence, and gently kissed him on the lips. Literary theft, Ivan cried, suddenly going into some kind of rapture. You stole that from my poem. Thank you, however. Get up, Alyosha, let's go. It's time we both did. And we'll stop here.